This webinar has been planned to share our learnings and expertise with you. Let me introduce the panelists to you. We have with us Mr. Srinivasan, who leads the consulting practice group and has 13 years of experience behind him. Mr. Ayan Ray, who is a senior associate business consultant and has around 6 years of experience. Mr. Rahul Agarwal, who is the director of Endeavour, Mr. Manish Garg, who is our COO, and Mr. Vinay Shukla, who is our director. I would request all the attendees who have questions to please post their questions in the sections in the panel of GoToWebinar. We would address the questions one by one after we are finished with presenting to you about an enterprise mobility strategy. Handing over to Mr. Srinivasan.
Thank you, Ambika. Good morning, gentlemen. Most of us, or rather all of us, know what enterprise mobility is all about. And most of us would have encountered or worked on mobility at some level. Now, what is so great about enterprise mobility and why do we need a strategy? This might be a question. Let me take a step back and explain Endeavour's experience, which will answer this question. Now, Endeavour, having partnered with some of the enterprises in the journey towards mobility, has learned a lot on mobility best practices and the common mistakes that enterprises commit while introducing mobility. And this is when Endeavour realized that these mistakes originated from various factors of enterprise mobility, and we needed a combined strategy to address them. So there is a need for a strategic approach. And we felt that it's our responsibility to share these experiences and the common pitfalls that enterprises face, and this webinar is a resultant of the same. In the next 1 hour, we will take you through the process of building an enterprise mobility strategy. If one amongst you would have to build the same for your organization, what all you should do and how to go about the same, this will be addressed in this webinar. We will also briefly introduce Endeavour's approach in building such an enterprise mobility strategy. So once this session on enterprise mobility strategy is over, you will have a 10 minutes time slot to ask your questions at the end of this session. Now let me hand over to my co-panelist, Mr. Ayan Ray, who will take you through the remaining part of this webinar.
Thank you, Srini. You have already introduced enterprise mobility in a very concise way. Ladies and gentlemen, starting off with today's presentation, we are going to talk about what enterprise mobility is, what it means for you as an organization, and why you need a strategy. Now, before diving right into the ins and outs of enterprise mobility, let's just consider what mobility is in general. Well, we can say that from the various experiences we have regarding voice and user phones and applications and so on, what we try to achieve and try to do with mobility is we want the ability to stay connected while on the move. It is the ability to access data and the use of services anytime and anywhere. Now, keeping keeping this in mind, how does mobility impact the enterprise? Well, if you look at all the services and the data that we are consuming, you can say that mobility brings enterprise to the point of activity. And what does enterprise mobility offer to an enterprise? If you look at the various challenges and the various opportunities that we have, well, we can say that an enterprise mobility is today a necessity. It is no longer in the realm of innovation. It has moved forward. In earlier days, having a mobile application or a mobile presence in any way, having it being it customer facing or be it in the realm of your own staff, was considered a business advantage. But today, since everyone has got some presence in the mobility field, it is a necessity. Again, done in a right manner, enterprise mobility can reduce the cost of doing business for you and improve the overall operational efficiencies of your organization. Now, enterprises have been using mobility in some form since a long time. Earlier it was voice, then it moved forward slowly to the realm of applications, but it was always plagued by the low penetration, the high cost of adopting mobility, and of course the power of the devices was very limited. So you had these very low power disconnected mode PDAs which did not have their own communication capabilities. And in overall, it became a very siloed approach to mobility. Now, as time has passed and the capabilities of the mobile devices as well as the network have increased, we have more and more businesses realizing that more and more can be done using mobility. At the beginning of this stage, we have BlackBerry with email, which comes as one of the first widespread use of enterprise mobility. Then our other vendors have caught up, so we have got OSs like Symbian, Windows Mobile, and iPhone, each having their own strengths and areas of expertise. And now, by leveraging the device and web-based applications, and enterprises extending its reach and accessibility into newer domains. However, it is still a very siloed, or rather, let's say, coordinated approach. Different branches of the same organization realize that they have something to gain by working together. So they are taking a coordinated approach with the realization that even more closer cooperation will make things even better, allow them to gain more efficiencies and so on. So there is an understanding that a strategic approach may be helping. But however, at this point of time, a strategic approach is lacking in many of the organizations who want to get into the mobility space in a big way. Now, what's happening in the corporate world right now? What are the typical use cases and the typical examples where mobility has been looked at from the usability perspective? So we have content where mobility is making content available to a mobile workforce. For example, the sales force gets the latest price list or a product brochure while they are on the go to a client meeting. A repair technician can pull up a manual or a checklist quickly using a mobile device while they are actually servicing a piece of machinery on the field. We also have got workflows. For example, act-on functions like simple approvals for leaves or invoices, and or workflows to complete surveys or forms from a client visit. All of these are being mobile enabled, allowing the people to respond while on their move, anytime, from anywhere. There are transactions, for example, taking order or making a delivery where some form of approval is required. We also have corporate communications, evolving from earlier email, then on to instant messaging. Corporates are using mobile devices to spread and disseminate information and message among its employees. Messages like the annual performance report, important policies, the CEO's message to the staff, etc. At the same time, we are seeing the use of social media tools, Twitter, Facebook. Most of the companies have some sort of presence, and not only that, they are using it quite successfully for generating loyalty, for gaining and presenting their viewpoint on the market strategy. There are various customer-oriented applications that allow an enterprise to spread its message, improve brand recall, generate brand loyalty, and so on. So we understand that enterprise mobility is important, but why do we need a mobility strategy? Why should we consider it important for our business to have a strategic approach to mobility? And if we do agree to have a enterprise mobility strategy, how should we go about it? Well, there are various factors involved in enterprise mobility. Some of the factors are presented here. One of the most important factors is people. There are multiple aspects on understanding how people affect mobility. There are users who can be executives, who can be the field workers, or who can be the customers of the organization. There are people who can enable mobility by managing the IT infrastructure and support, and then there are the people who create the applications that others use. There are content publishers who publish content, and all of these people will be impacted in some way or the other. Now, the people here have their own usage habits, own expectations, own cultural preferences, and for a successful introduction of mobility and to be able to leverage the power of mobility, it is very important to understand what the goals of the people are, what are the expectations are, and so on. Now, as we understand people, we understand that most of the organizations have processes, policies, and governance in place. There are established as-is processes and policies which may need to be relooked. For example, approvals from mobile devices should that be considered official, and how would one go about it? Then there are new processes that can take advantage of mobility. Why processes and governing principles? Because mobility touches people, it touches the security, the data, the control management, the support and maintenance. In general, the policies govern the general working of the company. So we need to have a framework by which mobility can be introduced, and we need to understand the processes that will govern. Now, the main reason for enabling mobility is, of course, applications. We have got many applications that are already existing in the enterprise's backend. We have got legacy applications. Some of them may be mobile enabled, so some of them may be very easily, and some of them may not be mobile enabled in the first place. We have got, for example, SAP, where a lot of workflows can be easily mobile enabled. On the other hand, there can be some very complicated analytical and reporting functions which may not lend itself to be very easily mobile enabled. Apart from that, as we introduce mobility, we might find that there are some applications which are specifically useful for mobile devices. For example, a workflow that collects information from the field operators from their mobile devices, and these can be location stamped using the camera, the GPS attached to the mobile device, as well as maybe a picture can be taken for whatever survey that they are doing from the mobile's camera. Now, all of these together can be enabled by using a middleware component. As we understand, most of the most of the IT infrastructure is already set, and being legacy in nature, not all of them lend very easily to being mobile enabled. So what does a middleware do? It helps extend the enterprise application to a mobile device. It allows to manage and control. It allows to do much more by being a glue which brings together the various components of an enterprise's IT infrastructure and the mobile device. For example, many organizations are powered by a content management system that has many data formats. However, all are not supported on devices. Now, instead of maintaining multiple versions of the same content just to mobile enable them, the mobile middleware can repurpose the content for a larger target device on the fly. Security is a very important aspect again. There are multiple aspects of security. You have the people, you have got the technology and the process aspects of security here. And we need to understand each one of these to be able to successfully come up with a mobility strategy that an enterprise can leverage to move forward. We have got devices, which is one of the most important aspects. Mobile device selection being of central importance. There are many aspects to selecting devices, and depending on the use cases, the cultural aspects, the different people who will be using the devices. We have got many selections coming up. For example, field force need a ruggedized device. A salesperson may be using an iPhone or a BlackBerry device, and so on. Now, putting together all of these components, we come to realize that control and management is important. For the general IT infrastructure, the PCs, the servers, and so on, we have some sort of controlling mechanism. Now, on top of that, we need to understand that the mobile devices, a large part of the mobility infrastructure of a company would be outside its four walls. So the security aspects, the control and managing aspects become that much more important. On top of it, mobile usage has got a network cost associated with it. So there are various factors coming into play here. You have got cost, we have got the deployment, we have got the enforcing of policies, the life cycle of various applications and the devices themselves, the management and control of various device functions based on what kind of function is required from them, and of course the management and control of data. And last but not the least, we have got the support and maintenance function. Now, support can be on device. Support can be like calling back the corporate help desk and going for L1, L2 or level 3 support as the case may be. Or support can be a simple self-service portal. Now, depending upon the requirements of the organization and depending upon the technical maturity of the people, different support mechanisms come into play. And for a successful enterprise deployment of mobility, support and maintenance must be understood and taken into account properly. Now we understand what are the different factors of enterprise mobility, but why the need for a strategy? As one of the first and foremost things while deploying any kind of software, hardware, or tools is, of course, understanding how much it is going to cost, what would be the impact in the budgeting, how do you go about assigning and the different numbers to it, and of course finding out what is the total cost of ownership, who is going to own it and who is going to bear. And for all of these, we need to have a plan which will tell us when to go for what investment, how to assess going about a certain investment, and thus the need for a strategic approach. A strategic approach also enables us to be ready to plan and implement different mobility projects and solutions on demand, sometimes with by anticipating the future needs and so on. The strategic approach also lends itself very well to the policies, management and control of the mobile infrastructure, and thereby integrating them with the larger corporate network. Now, as much as we realize that we need an enterprise mobility strategy, we must also know how to develop one. Now, to develop what would be the steps that need to be followed. What would be the outcome of each step? How do we measure the success of the strategy that we developed? Or how do we measure the success of the steps that we are following to develop a strategy? Well, to develop a mobile strategy, of course, we need to follow certain steps as we just spoken about. At a high level, we can say that we must first understand the needs of mobility for the organization, the goals, and the expectations. We must analyze and identify the challenges and the opportunities present. We must strategize and plan the course of action and define a roadmap to follow. And then we must return back periodically to measure how the plan is progressing in terms of implementation and integration. And of course, depending on change realities, make course corrections. As an enterprise, to successfully formulate an enterprise mobility strategy, we first need to understand the goals of the organization. Specifically, we need to understand the parts that mobility can play in realizing that goal. For example, one of the goals of an organization may be to be present in specific aspects of a customer's life. For example, a organization that deals in fast-moving consumer goods may want to be present in at that point where they are making the buying decisions, and mobility can be a tool which they can leverage. But the question is, what can be done to realize this goal via mobility? What does an organization need to do to enable the mobility aspects of this? Similarly, the business organization, the technology landscape, the current deployment of mobility all need to be accounted for. Understanding the current mobility landscape would enable the planning of the transition from a siloed environment to a strategically planned and integrated environment where mobility will be one of the things that can be leveraged at will to generate value. Similarly, understanding the business and technology of an organization will help map out the processes, the applications, and the infrastructure required for a successful enterprise mobility adoption. Understanding the people, the process, and the technology enables us to identify the challenges, the operating constraints, and the expectations of the people who would be most impacted by the rollout of mobility. And the people here can be the users, the content producers, the managers. By creating a mobile wish list, by talking to the various stakeholders in the organization, will allow the identification of priority areas, and from this onwards, we can actually go forward and find out what should be the focus of the various budgetary exercises and the roadmap. The information and the knowledge gained during the understanding phase of going about trying to come up with enterprise mobility strategy needs to be analyzed against the various people, process, and technology related enterprise mobility factors that were presented in the earlier slide. Two of the main aspects of analysis, among others, is the impact on people, process, and policies of the company, and the impact on the infrastructure needs. If you look at the people and process and policy aspect, mobility will impact multiple users of mobility, the administrators, the content generators, in the way they do work. The cultural aspects of the workplace changes with the introduction of the anytime, anywhere paradigm. The people of an organization need to be sensitized to the changes, and the enterprise mobility strategy must take into account for it to be successful. Similarly, the established policies and processes of the organization need to be updated to support mobility. For example, an organization may have a policy where sensitive enterprise data may not be taken outside the four walls of its network. But once mobility is introduced and applications start using this sensitive data, the proper policy and governance principles must dictate the use, the dissemination, the transport of this data between the mobile device and the backend infrastructure. An enterprise mobility strategy and roadmap has to consider and review, and it should be updated as part of the roadmap. Mobile infrastructure needs are again very integral to the introduction of enterprise mobility. It would require planning and investments into field infrastructure, for example, mobile devices, as well as the server infrastructure to support mobility. A enterprise mobility strategy must address this aspect of mobility adoption with identification of what needs to be in place and a roadmap to put that in place. An infrastructure requirement could come from device selection, device management, and enterprise application platforms which will support the various mobile applications that will be deployed. Now, looking at the device selection aspect, which is one of the most important cost factors, as well as the most important factors in terms of impacting the various downstream and upstream mobility introduction points here. As an enterprise, you may choose to position the device yourself, or may want to leverage the devices that the users have. So there is always the first choice between selecting corporate label as well or individual label or a mix of devices. In either cases, there are multiple factors that need to be analyzed against the mobility requirements of the organization that have been identified earlier during the understanding phase. There are people factors, there are environment needs, there are usability factors, and all of them come together. For example, there is a person who is going to work on a factory, let's say factory floor, may need a ruggedized device. On the other hand, there is no point in deploying a 3G or Wi-Fi based enabled device where the network is not available. Field workers in developing countries do not have a lot of understanding of technology, so they may want a very simplified user interface. So the people factors, the environmental needs, and the usability factors all come together to dictate or sort of constrain and narrow down the choices available in terms of selecting a device. On top of that, there is the cost of supporting and maintaining a device. What would be the support and maintenance cost of a mobility deployment once a particular device is selected? What are the additional infrastructure, hardware, and software to be procured? What would be the additional costs? What would be the gains in selecting a particular strategy or a particular device or platform to justify the costs involved? Then, of course, there are the solution requirements. For example, the need for the presence or absence of specific features, for example, GPS, camera, or the ability to connect to specific devices like printers or sensors, and so on. And all of these are controlled by the overall cost of a mobility platform, including the cost of the various factors presented here, the cost of the infrastructure that has to be put in place on the back end, and the cost of the training, the support, the maintenance, and so on. Another very important aspect here is, of course, the mobility infrastructure and management aspect. Now, the mobility infrastructure to be put in place will dictate to a large extent the solutions that can be mobile enabled. An enterprise mobility strategy would need to address the various mobile infrastructure that an organization would need. To do this, first they must look at the back-end infrastructure requirements, what applications and what systems are already in place and that can be mobile enabled. What are the various requirements from the field force and the people who would be actually using the mobile devices? Apart from that, there are various other factors. For example, device provisioning. What would be the provisioning mechanism? How would the devices be given to a user who is not directly connected to a particular office? How to select, activate, and deploy the devices? How to distribute software? Would it be pulled or would be pushed from a particular location within the enterprise? How does the enterprise control the deployment of different softwares? What would be the governing process and the policies to be employed while testing, approving, and deploying, or rollback or removal of such software? What are the remote device control and maintenance requirements? What needs to be controlled? Why does that need to be controlled? What are the ways to go about controlling this? Is there a people factor to it, or is it going to be controlled specifically by technology? What are the policy enforcement requirements? How can the process and policies be put in place and be deployed on a device? What are the additional requirements that come up with respect to it? And of course, asset management. And as mobility and mobile devices become assets themselves, they will need to be audited and they will need to be tracked. In that case, we need to understand and analyze what are the kind of record keeping and auditing needs that crop up. What would be the process to handle the lost devices? What would be the strategy to minimize the loss of devices and so on? And as the asset management system of a enterprise is already in place, we must analyze how this asset management system is going to be updated to support mobility. There is telecom expense management. Telecom expense being a large part of the overall cost of ownership of a device. Now, from this perspective, we need to understand what are the main cost factors of mobility usage for an enterprise. Now, as the case may be, it can vary from company to company. One organization may spend a lot of money on roaming phone calls, whereas another may spend a lot of money on data usage. Now, in such a case, what would be the strategy to control, or rather, let's say, manage the cost associated with mobility? Will it be employee controlled, or will it be centrally controlled by the enterprise? What would be the strategy and process to divide the cost between the user and the enterprise? All of these factors need to be analyzed, and based on the information gathered during the understand stage, we must come up with recommendations and guidelines on how to go forward. As we understand, applications are one of the main reasons why mobility is deployed. A mobile enterprise application platform acts as a glue between the different components of the enterprise mobility deployment in an organization. On one side, it serves to mobile enable the backend and the legacy systems. On the other hand, it can also host applications specifically for mobile devices. It can act as the connection point for the mobile device with the enterprise network. And it can take up tasks like security, verification and validation of the mobility requests coming in, device synchronization, provisioning. It is a very important component in the enterprise's mobility infrastructure and must be analyzed with a broader view of solution delivery capability. There are many vendors that offer an application platform, and it will be necessary to assess them for compatibility with the enterprise's goals and requirements before selection of the platform. In general, such a system must support multiple backend architectures. It must support multiple device types. It should have multiple functionalities like device management, provisioning, content repurposing, analytics, etc. Apart from this, there are various other aspects that need to be taken into account. One of the principal aspects being security. Understanding the needs of security for an organization is very important if they are to secure their IP assets. Large parts of the mobile deployment will be outside the enterprise's wall and beyond the direct control, as in case of PCs which are within the walls and can be controlled from a central position. Before defining a strategy for enterprise mobility, the security aspects must be analyzed and the impact of the enterprise assets. On one hand, the security impacts people and processes. The strongest and the weakest link in security are, of course, people. So they must be made aware of the security threat, and there must be agreements on the measures for protection that are necessary. Suitable policies and processes need to be created and enforced to ensure that security is not compromised. Use cases to identify, manage, and mitigate compromises must be analyzed and incorporated into policies. Now, apart from the people and process, the other important factor, of course, is technology. The main different points of vulnerabilities need to be assessed and plugged. There is the network, which is the communication channel between the server and, of course, the mobile device, but completely outside the control of the organization. There is a device and the infrastructure. Being on the field, a device has got its own vulnerabilities. It can be compromised, it can be stolen. And of course, since the server, or let's say the enterprise is opening up a part of itself so that it can talk to a mobile device, it is actually making itself vulnerable to external attacks. And then there is data, which is one of the most important assets of an organization. The data needs to be secured in multiple ways using access control, encryption, secure delete, and so on. And understanding the requirements for storing the data on a mobile device, etc., needs to be taken into account while analyzing the goals and analyzing the information collected for coming up with a mobile enterprise strategy. Now, we have seen that there are multiple factors that need to be analyzed. There are lots of data collected, and these data will be analyzed against the factors that define enterprise mobility. An analysis will tell us what should be factored into the strategy, and what should be the importance that should be given to each of the factors that have been found after analysis. The next step is to strategize. This exercise will lead to a plan of action along with the goals and the timelines to achieve them. The strategy itself will consist of multiple sections. One of them would be, of course, the application strategy, which will dictate the efforts of the efforts to mobile enable the existing backend systems and the efforts to develop new applications. It will impact the choice of platforms and the development paradigms. It will require decisions, for example, build versus buy, going for a web-based infrastructure versus a SIG client-based infrastructure and application development strategy down the road. There is the infrastructure strategy, which will identify the steps, the process, the policies related to infrastructure selection, deployment, maintenance, and auditing. Understanding the total cost of ownership components and the various cost centers will enable the development of strategies that proactively seek to minimize costs. Once a strategy is developed, it can be implemented by following a mobility roadmap that would be developed as part of the strategizing exercise. Each factor impacts the cost to roll out the enterprise mobility. Taking a strategic approach requires the understanding of the impact of each of the TCO factors. In addition, these factors may be measured on a continual basis and compared with the identified baselines to measure value of deployment. We have multiple factors here. We have got software procurement and hardware procurement and maintenance costs. We have got the cost associated with mobile application distribution and upgradation. We have got the cost that comes with policy and governance, the various compliance and non-compliance requirements, the various auditing requirements. We have got the cost associated with the user training and re-education. We have the cost of supporting the mobility deployment and, of course, the help desk. We have got the mobile device management cost, and we have got the airtime fees. All of these need to be factored into any kind of budgeting exercise, any kind of roadmap, any kind of enterprise mobility strategy. A strategy must have very clear goals and timelines to address each of these factors and come up with ways to reduce costs and improve operational efficiency. As a way to go forward, we can actually build the enterprise mobility roadmap. A roadmap can consist of multiple segments. For example, it can have a quick win segment, which will be in force for, let's say, the first 6 months to a year. During this phase, we can actually identify some applications that lend themselves very easily to mobile devices. Now, using these applications mobile enabling these applications will have multiple benefits. The primary being the understanding of the value that an organization derives from mobility. understanding the value that that particular application will give. And of course, it will serve to enhance knowledge and allow the collection of metrics, which will allow for better future planning. And a successful application will also convince the people who are in the decision-making roles about the gains and the benefits that mobility can present. We also have the short-term goals, which can include understanding, identifying, and then mobile enabling the backend systems that can be mobile enabled. At this stage, we can start looking at the various mobile application, enterprise application platforms, and go about selecting one or multiple to satisfy the enterprise's needs. And in a long-term basis, we can look at a time window of say 2 to 3 years, where an enterprise can build the infrastructure which will allow for mobile enabling of any part of the enterprise on demand. And of course, at each stage, we need to revisit the strategy. Now, why do we need to revisit? Of course, being mobility is a very volatile sphere. We have got evolving people needs. We have got process needs that keep changing. We have got technology that keep on advancing. And of course, the cost factor which keeps on changing as the market conditions change. When would be a good time to define or do a reevaluation? Now, in the beginning, it would be a good idea to define a evaluation plan and follow it. But at the same time, as market conditions change and requirements come up, it would be good to revisit often and find out if a detailed exercise is required or not. And what would be the correct way to go about revisiting and remeasuring, reanalyzing, and re-understanding. Of course, the collection of metrics on a continual basis is very important. The reviewing the business and use cases and assessing the device and technology landscapes are equally important. All of these put together will allow us to come up with enterprise mobility strategy and follow through it. Now, I hand over to Mr. Srinivasan to take it forward in terms of what Endeavour can do as a company.
Now, Endeavour has a three-phased approach towards doing this enterprise strategy. Now, we have an understand phase where we understand the goals of the customer, the people, process, and the technology elements. Now, this is done in multiple steps. As a first step, we publish certain questionnaires which probe the customer in terms of their business, the technology, and the mobility landscape. Now, we get the responses from the customer for this questionnaire, and this is analyzed at our side. From this, we get some amount of clarity. Now, with this amount of clarity, we take it to the next step where we perform an on-site study where we conduct interviews with key stakeholders from the customer side to understand their business, technology, and the mobility landscape with much more clarity. Now, after this understand phase, we get all this data that has been gathered by us, validated by the customer, and we move on to the next phase, which is analyze and strategize. Here, we analyze all the factors of enterprise mobility against the customer's business, technology, and the mobility aspects. Now, apart from that, we also get into the details of what mobile infrastructure management needs are there and what mobile enterprise application platform needs are there from the customer's perspective. Now, these two needs are from the customer side, and then we analyze what is available in the market. We also do a build versus buy and come to a conclusion on whether the customer can build this or he can buy something off the shelf which can help him. Along with this, we also analyze the total cost of ownership based on all the factors that were discussed till now to see what will be the outflow in terms of a budgetary perspective. Post that, we go into the third step where we recommend. Here we draw a detailed implementation roadmap where we have this roadmap studded with quick wins. Quick wins are nothing but something which can show some immediate value to the management and something which can be easily implemented. Then the roadmap has something called short-term and medium-term goals. Now, in short-term and medium-term goals, we very clearly position their device infrastructure management and the middleware needs. Now, along with this, there is a recommendation on solution architecture, devices, and various other aspects. Now, post this, we also, in the recommendation part, we also tell that how to revisit a roadmap, when to revisit, and why to revisit. So these guidelines are provided there along with the recommendations. So this completes our enterprise mobility strategy building process, and the final deliverables are complete assessment report and a presentation which is done at the customer's end.
Now we have certain questions from our attendees. I will read out the questions one by one and would request one of the panelists to answer them later. The first question from one of our attendees is that, is this process patented to Endeavour? And I would request our MD, Mr. Rahul, to answer this question.
Thanks, Amita. Well, as far as the process is concerned, this process is not patented. However, I'd like to mention that this process has actually evolved over a period of time. Given that we have worked with various large and small organizations of all sizes over the last eight years, and helped them conceptualize their strategy in terms of how mobility can help them increase their operational efficiencies and so on. So what we have done is we have put that entire process wherein we go and consult our partners and customers into this kind of a mobile opportunity assessment exercise, which through which we basically educate them on the various nuances of mobility and how they should go about implementing that process.
Thanks, Rahul. Now we have another question from our attendees, and the person intends to ask if we can give some references of some of our clients to whom we have done this exercise. I would again request our MD, Mr. Rahul, to take this up.
Well, I would like to mention that this is a public forum, so maybe we would not like to disclose any references over here in this forum. However, we'll be more than glad to take any such request and get back with the details of such engagements that we have done with various of our customers, and also basically help understand or inform in greater detail as to what exactly we have done with such customers and what's the value they have derived from this process in totality. So feel free to get in touch with us or drop in a mail to us, and we'll be glad to assist.
We have another question from one of our attendees, and the person intends to ask that whether we can have a copy of the presentation forwarded. I will request our panelist, Mr. Ayan, to take this up.
Hello, Will. This can definitely be shared, and in fact, we'll be making it available publicly on our website, endeavour.com, very shortly. And just to add to that, for the sake of people who have joined on this call, we'll also be sharing the link where we'll be hosting the entire webinar, so that you may go back and refer to that at your convenience.
We have another question from one of our attendees, and the attendee intends to ask, how do we deal with the paradigm that mobile devices landscape is changing very rapidly? We have new and mobile devices models every week. So how portable is our platform or strategy across a wide range of mobile devices? I would request a panelist, Mr. Ayan, to take this up.
This, I believe, is from Mr. Saket Trivedi. Saket, there are multiple aspects to this again. One, of course, is yes, new devices are coming up, new platforms are coming up, and they open new possibilities. Now, from an organization's perspective, you are primarily looking at what you actually need to gain out of mobility. And from that perspective, as you go with a strategic approach, you want to be able to ready to respond to different business challenges, different changing environments, and so on. So from a device selection perspective, well, when new devices come up and when we are trying to reassess our selection of devices, it would be prudent to go and find out what's new there in the market and what additional benefits it can offer, what it will make easy for us to do. And on the other hand, on the back-end side, we may need to see if we have got any additional requirements in terms of infrastructure or others to be put in place. But as we see that infrastructural requirements, deployments, etc., are a continuously evolving process. So we should keep on revisiting the strategy, and then maybe once in a while there is a new requirement that actually needs us to rethink. For example, we are going for a deployment in a new geographical region, and the device paradigms, the usage paradigms may be very different from what you may be used to previously. So all of these things kept into notice. We must go about revisiting the strategy every so often to take into account all the changes.
Now, I must say that we have a lot more questions from our attendees, but as we're running out of time, so I would request all the attendees who have further questions with us or need any information from us on enterprise mobility strategy to please drop in a mail to us at info@techendeavour.com. Or if they have specific questions for Mr. Ayan and Mr. Srinivasan, then they can get in touch with them at their individual IDs. Thank you, everybody. I would thank everybody for their time and for attending this webinar.